with a roaring crescendo, we begin another missions session. This is vk3sl, and we're here for another part of the marathon. That's what happens. There's the proverbial marathon itch, I suppose it is. It's something that's compelling me to do this. Not quite sure what it is. It's a bad infliction, I think. Anyhow, here we are again, and without much of a plan. It seems to be the best way not to be over-organising, and I have been doing other things and not thinking much about this, so all I did was reach into the bin of records behind me and pick out a 20s disc to kick-start the session, and it happens to be Nat Shilkret and the band on an old Victor record from about 1927, I think. It's a pretty catchy tune. It's got a big crack in it, but that doesn't matter. Name of the song is Wherever You Go, Whatever You Do, and I'm vk3sl testing. And that didn't work. So what we do is we check the system, and I know what's happened. This is a disaster. I lost my mojo there. We'll go back. Well, decided to put the noise reduction system in for this. So there we go. Now it's in mode, and we'll try again. Take two.
Whatever you do, I want you to know that I love you. Whoever you miss and whoever you kiss, I'll always say this, I love you. You're all I want, all I care for, it seems. You're all I see every night in my dreams. Wherever you go, whatever you do, I want you to know that I love you.
That's quintessentially 1920s. So many signature sounds from the time, and the arrangement is brilliant. Would have loved to have been in that orchestra. It would have been fun. It's a big sound and a bit of natural ambience there. You can sort of hear the hall sound a little in that very scratched recording, but it's all there. And I like it. I find that music quite fascinating. It's just that incredible era where things moved from very formal conventions into something far more fluid and contemporary, especially in the use of syncopation and the way and the nature of the arrangements. I won't go into it anymore. But there's another one here that took my attention. I was listening to The Tube this morning, and a fascinating recording has popped up, courtesy of, I can tell you in a minute if I can find it. Is it gone? Might have disappeared. Yeah, no, here we go. It's Melville Gibson, and it's been put up by Mr. Dello. And Melville Gibson was a pianist, a great, remarkable ragtime pianist. And this is an early recording. I think it's an acoustic. It's called Burnt Sugar, and it's a triple rag. And in this instance, he is exploring the He's exploring the sort of ragtime conventions, but in three different styles within one piece, and it goes berserk, it goes crazy. But again, this is another instance of this interesting transition of syncopated styles. A really interesting record. Now, someone just came up on on VHF then a minute ago. I should mention that we're back to our original call-in frequency. It's 145070, so we'll stick with that for the moment, and we'll see how things go if anyone wants to chime in and be a part of this madness. But let's have a listen to Melville Gibson. Melville Gideon, what am I saying? And a triple rag, Burnt Sugar. Well, that has to be heard to be believed. That's mega virtuosity. Mr. Gideon. And that's off an old Zonophone. It's put up by Nick Dello, and it does represent a few different takes on sort of ragtime themes, heavily laden with chromaticism and gear changes and knee jerks. It's full of all that asymmetry which characterises that music. It's brilliant and interesting, and it's almost like a pianola at the end. It sounds like there's four hands, and that's just so fast and so dense. So I've written him down. I'm going to find out a bit more about this guy. Well, I wonder what else he recorded. It's not sort of jazz in the free flow sense, but it's pre-jazz and interesting extension on the ragtime theme. Anyhow, this is the place where we explore new horizons, and I like to be sort of on the edge a bit and sort of hear things for the new first time myself. It sort of makes it all a bit more interesting for me, and I don't really know what these are about. I sometimes test things a bit, but I don't listen to things right through, and I don't like over-preparing for these missions. Now, just a word about what is going on here. These are test sessions to validate volume and clarity. In the FM mode on 160 meters, and also on UHF. That's 438.725 megahertz, and streaming online. So I should say that our streaming service is our primary service. That's probably the right thing to say. So if you go there, you can hear it in true fidelity. It's vk3sl has a dedicated YouTube channel where there is a live stream happening right now. Okay, another record out of the batch, untested, unchecked, is Lionel Hampton. Title jumped out at me. I thought it said 50 Shades of Grey, but no, it says 50 Shades of Jade. This is vk3sl. Lionel Hampton and the band with Shades of Jade. Presumably recorded in the 1940s by the sound of it. Very cruisy. And we're sampling original source material here on vk3sl test station. On the other turntable, I've dug up a Ruth Wallace record. Now, her records are always interesting because they were often sold under the counter, a bit clandestine because they're very provocative. She certainly held her own as being someone who probably added a little bit of titillation to wartime sensibilities. Anyhow, I have no idea what's on this one, but the title has a sort of an air of intrigue. It's called Johnny Had a Yo-Yo. So Ruth Wallace, a Ruth Wallace original. And let's see if this works. Wait a minute. Turntable number 2. vk3sl testing.
Children will be children. They're such dear little girls and boys. Haven't got a worry in the world except about their toys. Little Susie May, who lives across the way, came to visit us, and this is what she had to say. Johnny's got a yo-yo, he got it from his dad. He always lets me play with it, it's the best toy I ever had. He never lends it out to any other kids in town, 'cause I'm the only one who knows how to get it up and down. I'm older than the other kids, and I have been around. Johnny's got a yo-yo, it really is a wow. Teacher keeps him after school so he can show her how. It's shiny and he says it is brand new. And he can do more tricks with it than his dad can do. You can't learn to play with it just by wishing. You gotta know how to hold it in the right position by intuition. Johnny's got a yo-yo, and all the kids they say, if his dad finds out I play with it, there'll be hell to pay. Jacks and Emmys don't interest me any longer, I confess. Since I played with Johnny's yo-yo, I'm spoiled a bit, I guess. I'm sure I could be happy and life would be divine if I knew that Johnny's yo-yo were mine, all mine. I told him I would buy it, no matter what it cost. But Johnny says without his yo-yo he'd be lost. And I believe it. Y is for yesterday, I had it. O is for the way till today. While you had it. O is only that it's here to stay. I love it so. Y is for your hottest mustache. O is only that here comes the end. Put them all together, they spell yo-yo. Believe me, that toy's a boy's best friend.
Oh, say no more. That has exceeded anything I expected. Yeah, Ruth Wallace evidently, had quite a few stories to tell there. Well, with trepidation, we'll sample the other side at some point, I think. We'll see. Ruth Wallace original. Well, I hope there's no kiddies listening to that. We'll now have a listen to something from the 1941 Super Rhythm Style series. It's a recording of Benny Goodman and his sextet. And in this instance, let's get this switched in. It features Count Basie as a guest member of the ensemble. That's what it says on the label. So let's have a listen to this now. vk3sl testing on 160 and UHF and streaming online. from the 1941 Super Rhythm Style series. Benny Goodman and his sextet, and On the Alamo. Apparently features Count Basie on that recording, according to the label of an old parlophone. I'm vk3sl, and we're testing here on 160 and UHF, and did I hear a signal there? Hi Frank, how are you?
Very well indeed, thank you. And you?
Yeah, good. Yep, hang in there.
Yeah, no, look, I wanted to come on and ask you about that ragtime pianist. He was terrific.
Yes, I'm fascinated by this artist. I would like to know more about him, and the name is, I can find it here. Looking.
That's
Yeah,
me.
Melville Gideon. Melville Gideon.
Wow.
And it was recorded early. It would be about 1922 or something like that.
He was terrifically inventive, wasn't he?
Oh, look, absolutely. He did things with rags with that style that I've heard nobody else do,
It's the same.
and it was constantly exploring different tangents. And,
I wonder if there's any more of this stuff around.
yeah, look, I've just noted his name, and I will look it up now. I was going to say, Frank, that those links, I've been looking at the Brian Eno stuff that you mentioned,
Oh, yeah.
and I had a good look at that, the Bloom, and I think I'm going to get it because it looks like it's quite an interesting platform to explore for generative music. So
It's potentially quite deep if you want to go into it.
yeah, there's two versions of it, and I think I might get the more advanced version, which offers a number of different sort of templates.
Yeah, that's what I've got.
Yeah, so I'm keen to see that one.
Oh, I'm glad you're interested in it.
Yeah,
Steve.
definitely. And I also had a look at Watcher as well, and
Yeah.
I've downloaded that, but I haven't quite worked out how to navigate that one.
No,
yet.
well, that's even deeper. There's a whole. The manual's huge in that.
Yeah,
But you can appreciate it at all sorts of levels.
sure. Yeah.
The deeper you go, the more control you can get over it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you can. There's a large number of parameters that you can program.
It's good. Yeah. No, look, thank you for that. I'm looking forward to spending some time. I like the idea. The notion really attracts me because it's it's interactive, and you are working. Well, so it's sort of like moulding something, really.
Yes,
It's a moving mass, a seething mass.
it's the sort of project would love, I think.
Yes, I'm sure he would. Absolutely, definitely would. Yeah, so that's exciting. So thanks for that. That was good. That was a really helpful sort of way forward there.
Yeah, I found it interesting. It's really good that you do. Look, I'll let you get on with it, Steve.
Okay. Well, look, what I might do. I found this morning that Mr. Techmoan has put up a program about the history of the compact cassette. There's something. There's someone on the top of you there.
It doesn't sound like he's on frequency. Geez, he's got a wide bandwidth. It's being ridiculous.
Oh, okay. Well, it looks like we've got interference again. So what I'll do is I'll just back off there, Frank, and we can chat another time, and I'll just let that go, and we'll have a listen now to the history of the cassette. Now, it's interesting. This is brought up by Mr. Techmo. It came up this morning, and it's quite intense. He looks at it from a multitude of angles, and it's a bit of a motor mouth episode, but there's a lot of information here, and he has got a great way of communicating. So let's have a listen to Mr. Techmoan.
On the 6th of March 2021, which is 10 days ago at the time I'm recording this, a gentleman called Lou Ottens passed away at the age of 94. And if you're a person who watches this channel, it's more than likely you're already familiar with this fact because he is the chap credited as being the inventor of the Philips compact cassette. I want to start off by talking about this word inventor because to me it conjures up certain images. I'm thinking of things a long time ago, like people working away in a lab and look what I've invented type of thing. And the Philips compact cassette was invented what I would consider kind of the modern age, late 50s, 60s, that kind of thing. And things weren't really just one guy at that point. I mean, I'm sure some things came out that were just one bloke, but the Philips compact cassette certainly wasn't one of those. It's a little bit like saying that Steve Jobs invented the iPhone. I mean, you wouldn't say that, would you? And if you search who invented the iPhone, you're not going to get one name. You're going to get, like, there's a team that worked on this product for many years. It was kind of half this idea, half that idea. They put those two things together, then changed it, and this, that, and the other came out. Same thing with the compact cassette. So Lou Ottens is credited as being the inventor of the compact cassette, but I don't think he was particularly happy with that acknowledgement himself. There's a documentary which came out a few years ago, but he's kind of credited as that in this, and you can see he's not comfortable with it. He's there with his old team. He said, well, it's not really me. I mean, it was a team thing. There were like 40 people working on it at the time. He's got the designer there, the guy that drew out the cassette, you know, the engineers, all that kind of stuff. But the fact is, not to take anything away, without Lou Ottens coming up with the idea and saying, look, this is what we need to work on, Philips wouldn't have worked on it. But as far as like the inventor of it, you know, he's kind of the instigator of the project to develop the cassette within Philips. But again, even outside Philips, there were loads of other people working on this idea. And in fact, there were other pre-existing products that, you know, predated the Philips compact cassette that are very much along similar lines. This is not an idea that just came out of the blue. The idea of having tape inside a cassette or a cartridge that you didn't have to spool onto a machine, and the way that they went about that was really combining a few things that had gone before, and those things really set out all the groundwork for the compact cassette. This did it successfully, but the people that went there first really made this possible. So let's look at some of the products that existed before the compact cassette. In order to understand what pre-existing technologies there were that could have influenced the design of the compact cassette, we first off need to know when the compact cassette was being developed. It was first shown to the public at the end of August 1963, which of course means that the development precedes that. And as far as various things I've read go, it either started as a project in 1960 or 1961. But if we just assume 1960 is when it started, that's when Lou Ottens walks into his team at Philips and says, you know what, here's what we need to work on. I'm fed up, tried to spool tape onto a reel-to-reel machine. Let's come up with something simpler and in a nice cartridge that's a lot easier to use. Now, of course, Philips had a history of reel-to-reel machines. I mean, this is a slightly later tape again, of course, but you know, they had a lot of reel-to-reel tape recorders on the market. And in fact, there are a couple of products from their own range that really had a lot of influence on the compact cassette. One was this. Now, this is branded as a Stella phone from Stella, but it was made by Philips. This uses 3-inch reels of tape, and this first came out in 1961 in a slightly earlier version than this one here. But they sold a truckload of them, which encourages them to continue working on the compact cassette. They probably got some more funding for it based on this thing being a big success. Now, that uses 3-inch reels. I've got one here somewhere. Yeah, there's a little 3-inch reel. Rather than take it off the machine, it's spooled on there. So yeah, there's plenty of little machines out already that use 3-inch reels of tape, and one of Philips' own product used one of those in a cassette already, and this was prior to that. In 1957 or 58 this came out. It's probably the end of 57, early 58. This thing, God, it weighs a ton. Metal, this thing. Now, what's the model number on this? I've just got to remember. Yeah, EL3581. So this is a Philips dictation device, and it just looks like another reel-to-reel machine, but it uses these things. These are 3-inch reels again in a cassette, but you'd buy them like this. You wouldn't have to put your own in here, although you can open them up to put them on another machine. So this is Philips' first cassette, I suppose. Very rudimentary, crude, just 2 reels with a hole in these plastic things and the tape going between them, but it was just designed to make, you know, easy snap load, they call it. So the idea was just pop it on there. So that's a Philips cassette from 1957. So that's one thing that predates the compact cassette. But there were some other products that had more of a direct influence on it. Let me grab a couple of those. Okay, now this is more like it. This is a cassette, isn't it? Well, it isn't a cassette. This is a RCA sound tape cartridge. There's a promo video for this. Well, I suppose it's a film back in the day, of course. It's on YouTube now as a video, though. And that's from 1958. And therefore, a lot of the things that you read about the RCA sound tape cartridge, you'll say, oh, it came out in 1958. No, that promo video, like a lot of things, preceded the launch of the product, and by quite a bit. I mean, RCA had been working on this for ages, but as you'll be aware from watching various videos about RCA's development of products, they seem to have a failure to launch. For some reason, they do a lot of development into things and they just can't get it out to market properly, and they kind of trip up at that last hurdle. And that was the case with this as well. After years of development, it didn't come out until late 1959. Quite a soft launch as well. I mean, RCA themselves only had 2 machines, I think, when this thing came out, but they'd encouraged some other people, like Bell or Bell Canto, to get on board with it, and they went a bit more all in on it. So you'll find more machines from other people, and RCA didn't really back their own product in the end. They kind of sold it to, it's like a timeshare or something. They're selling it off to other people who are buying into it, and then RCA are kind of like, well, we're not too sure ourselves. So yeah, they really fumbled this. But what this product is, perhaps I should have started with that, it's 1/4-inch tape, again, much the same as that Philips thing, and this was stereo, and the machines had auto reverse on some of them, and it basically a really nice format. Sounded all right as well. I did a demo of one of these, it sounded great. So this is a kind of 1959 product, so definitely out at the time Philips is sitting there thinking, let's come out with a cassette, and here's a cassette. But this was a failure in the market. Partially due to the kind of lack of enthusiasm from RCA for their own product, I think, and partially because of the price. In fact, let's go into the price now, let's find that. I've got it on here somewhere. Cost $300 for one of the RCA machines. That was $2,700 today, with inflation. You can understand that not becoming a mass market product. It was very expensive. A couple of nice innovations in this. 4-track tape. This is the first time anyone did 4-track, was for this format, and 4-track became a familiar thing in home reel-to-reel machines. And also this slowed the tape speed down to 3.75 inches per second. Most tape recorders at the time were running at 7.5 inches per second. People were wondering, well, will 3.75 and 4-track be good enough for sound quality? And they proved it was with this. And part of that was down to the input from 3M in developing better formulations of tape for this. Of course, the earlier tapes were quite rough and ready. You need to run them at a fast speed and maybe only put 2 tracks on them. So to get 4 tracks and at half the speed and still sounding good, not too much hiss, you're developing formulations. So that kind of pushed that side of the market on. 3M were working on the tape for this for years. They were aware of this product going to come out. Any minute now, I'll say, oh, we'll have this product. It's going to be massive success in the market. So 3M are gearing up for this product, and RCA are dragging their heels. And 3M are getting fed up with RCA at this point and say, you know what, we're going to launch our own cassette format, our own tape format. I shouldn't call them cassette. They was called them cartridge at the time, so everything was a cartridge. So they're going to launch their own cartridge system because they got fed up with RCA just fumbling and dragging their heels. And this is it. This is the 3M system. Now this, they were showing it off in 1959, and then it was 1960, and then it was 61. Eventually it came out in December 62, so I think they proved to themselves that it might not be as easy launching a format as they thought when they were getting angry with RCA. So yeah, the 3M Revere cartridge system. What is this? Well, this is what made the cassette possible. The headline stats for these are identical to one another. They both run at the same speed, 1 7/8 inches per second. The tape is 1/8 of an inch across. The difference was that when the Philips was launched, it was a mono format, 2-track, one going in either direction. You play that side, you play that side, it's just 1 track. This, again, similar idea, 2-track system, but they use as tracks for stereo. So you've got a bigger reel here, of course, than you would have in a cassette. And what happened with this format is the tape gets pulled out of the cartridge. So this is basically spool 1. And it's spooled up inside the machine, and the tape gets pulled across. So you're using your 2 tracks for your stereo. So these were a music format from the word go, a stereo music format. But the thing that happened with these, the one thing that made the cassette possible was the proving that you could run a tape at that speed and the quality was good enough. And that was because 3M, being the tape people who created this format, again worked on their formulations to develop a new low noise type of formulation which was suitable for music at 1 7/8 inches per second. So this is really the ancestor of the cassette, with a bit of this as well, because that's kind of the design, that's the tape, and you add those two things together, and you end up with that. Well, almost. And besides that, there was another format that was on the market as well. Now, I haven't got that one here, so I'm going to have to bring up some photos from the Museum of Obsolete Media. Yeah, so you're looking at the Minifon Attaché. This was first shown off in 1959, but launched in 1960 by the German company Protona, based in Hamburg. They primarily made kind of spy recorder type devices, or miniature recorders. I've got one of their wire recorders. The tape used in here is 1/4 inch inside this cassette, but it's definitely a cassette or cartridge system that looks similar to the Philips compact cassette, and yet it came out in 1960, the time when Philips started work on their compact cassette. Now, I'm quite sure that Philips were aware of the existence of the Minifon Attaché. After all, they weren't developing the cassette in a bubble. They were looking at what was out there on the market already and then working on improving upon it. It's mentioned that they did specifically look at the RCA cartridge system and indeed the 3M Revere woolen sack system as well. So I'm quite sure that the Minifon Attaché was also in that list. But these are perhaps a little bit more famous. This one, I'm sure not too many people here have heard of it. It's not well known nowadays. But that's because it wasn't a success in the market. But what this format then went on to do is it developed this tape, this 1/8 of an inch wide tape that wasn't out before this format, this higher quality 1/8 of an inch wide tape, which then went on to be used in the compact cassette. So when Philips are looking around to see, well, what can this cassette have in it? If they were following the Minifon Attaché, they're just using 1/4 inch wide tape, which makes your cartridge a certain size, but you get 1/8 of an inch wide tape, you can get a much smaller format, and effectively that is what has happened here. You've gone from 3.75 inches per second with a 1/4 inch tape to 1 7/8 inches per second with an 1/8 of an inch tape, and that is the difference in the size of the cassettes. So really, it's the tape that's in here that is the big development that really made the cassette possible. Now, I just want to mention why this was not a success. Again, if we just go back to prices. So in December 1962, they were doing test sales of the system, and it was $450 for a recorder or a player for these cartridges. So $450, 1962, inflation today, $3,900. So the tapes are cheaper, but the machine itself costs a fortune. That's why this wasn't a success. So what Philips did and went on to do is use this tape format in a much simpler system, and therefore a much cheaper system to manufacture. So again, the cassette's relatively cheap, and if we look back at the price of the first Philips system, now, thing to mention about this, these were much more popular in Europe than they were in the US, initially at launch anyway. So we're talking UK prices here. So the EL3300, which looked much the same as this, with inflation works out at £538 today. Still a lot of money, but you know, we're not talking insane amounts of money. So yeah, we're comparing UK with US prices there, and products that are from a few years apart from one another, so you can't do a direct comparison. But still, if we just look at the UK price of the compact cassette system, the EL3300, at the time it launched, it was a much more attractive proposition to the average person as a tape recorder than those earlier formats from RCA and 3M, but it was aimed at a completely different market, really. I mean, this is just designed to be a simple, easy to use, cassette based audio recorder for voice, and perhaps you could put a bit of music on it, but it was mono at the time it was launched. Whereas those earlier formats, the 3M and the RCA, whilst you could record your own tapes on these, from the word go they had pre-recorded music on them in stereo, and they were therefore aiming these at a more upmarket crowd, a hi-fi audiophile enthusiast, and that seemed to be the wrong approach, because those people have already got all their records or their reel-to-reel tape recorders, and you're then trying to encourage them to get another format with a limited amount of recordings on it and perhaps a lower quality. Well, you just can't do it. I mean, they were expensive. The only people who would be interested would be the high-end audiophile enthusiast community, and yet they had better formats already that they could have used. So that was the wrong approach to take. Philips took an approach from the other end, really. They were looking for people who hadn't got any kind of tape recorder or had got some basic reel-to-reel machine and wanted something that was more convenient to use. Interestingly, though, based on the fact that there were all those pre-existing formats out there, the Philips compact cassette, in the end, wasn't that unique of a device. In fact, there was only one part of this system, I believe, that they were able to patent, something that was unique to the compact cassette. And can you think what that particular thing is? I'll just take the lid off to show you. Right, so this is the unique part of the Philips compact cassette. That was it. Not the button. The movable heads, the way the head comes up into contact with the cassette when it's engaged. Everything else had static heads, so you'd put the cassette in, or the cartridge or whatever, you'd click it into the machine, but the heads and the pinch roller didn't come up to meet the cassette. They were already in contact with it from the moment it was put in. So that was the only part of the cassette that was unique. Interesting side note here, footnote, some kind of note. In 1963, Philips also launched another tape format. I don't know if they were trying to hedge their bets. They weren't sure whether the compact cassette was going to be a success. But it was this one. This came out in 1963 as well. And this is another sort of dictation format. And it comes in these nice little cartridges, and the tape gets pulled out of here and goes into the machine. And again, it's 1/8 of an inch wide tape. So you can see inside here we've got the tape that goes in that side, take up spool that side, and the machine automatically threads the tape for you. So again, a more convenient format than strictly open reel. But I don't quite know what the story was with this. I mean, it was obviously in development at the same time as the cassette, and it came out the same year as the compact cassette from Philips. Odd that they bring out two kind of similar ideas in the same year. Now, of course, it wasn't just Philips in the early 1960s who were thinking of producing an easier-to-use tape cartridge-based system. It seems like everyone was having a go at it. There was loads of different ones in the dictation space particularly, but these are a few that I've shown over the years. So I've got the Sanyo Micro Pack 35, which is 1/4-inch tape stacked on 2 reels. That was also sold in the US under the Channel Master name, amongst others. There was the Sabamobile. This is 1/4-inch tape, again, 3-inch reels, I think. Then these two are perhaps the most interesting and the most like the Philips compact cassette, if I can get that one out of there. We've got the Grundig DC International, and then this Sanyo tape cartridge system. I'm not too sure if there was a better name than that, but that was one that I featured in a video where I got a Sears branded tape, which looked very similar to the compact cassette, but it wasn't a compact cassette. The thing with this one is that it was basically a copy. Sanyo copied the compact cassette and came out with that. The Grundig DC International was a little bit more successful, and I've covered the story of the development of this before. This is kind of an offshoot of the compact cassette. Grundig went off on their own. They were going to join up with Philips. They went and did their own thing, basically copied the cassette design, but came out with this, the DC International. I'll put a link to the video where I go into this in better and greater detail. But this was an interesting bargaining chip. This was something that was used in the next section I want to talk about, which was really the deal that made the compact cassette successful. And it was when Philips joined up with Sony. Having a bunch of rival, incompatible and yet very similar formats on the market is not the way you make a successful product. Philips wanted the compact cassette to become the single worldwide agreed standard, and for that reason they went over to Japan to talk to Sony to get them on board with it. One of the two people that attended that meeting, by the way, was Lou Ottens, a gentleman we started off talking about at the beginning of this video. But yes, they wanted Sony to sign up to the compact cassette and agree to pay 20 yen for each cassette recorder sold within Japan. Sony disagreed with that idea, and then Philips said, okay, all right, we'll just charge you 6 yen for each cassette recorder you sell. Again, Sony pushed back. And the reason they were able to push back is because back in 1963 at that IFA Berlin show, Grundig, the people behind the DC International, had approached Sony and asked them to co-develop the DC International cassette. Now, Sony had said, no, we're not interested, but Grundig went ahead and also wanted still to get Sony on board with it. Now, Sony were more interested in signing up with the Philips system, but because they were able to say, well, look, if we don't have to use your cassette, we could always go with the DC International, and they're not going to charge us anything if we go with that one. So Philips had to agree not to charge any licensing fee for the compact cassette either if they wanted Sony to adopt it. Sony were happier to work with Philips than they were with Grundig, so it all worked out as far as that went, except of course Philips weren't getting any licensing fee for any compact cassette recorders that Sony went on to make. But part of that deal was non-exclusivity, so that effectively meant that anyone who wanted to could make a compact cassette recorder or player and not pay Philips anything. And therefore, yes, it did become a worldwide standard. It didn't make Philips rich on licensing fees, but it meant that all those different companies who were involved in the development of the various different cassette recorders and players were then all competing against each other to try and make a better product. It was like a open source project. So you get all these different companies all around the world involved in making a better cassette, and that goes all the way back to the people making the tape formulations, and that was what created the cassette boom effectively. Yeah, Philips started it off, started the ball rolling, but until that day in 1965 when they met up with Sony and thrashed out the deal that eventually was finalised in 1966, it was just a little Philips product that was sold in Europe. The worldwide phenomenon was created, really started in 1966. And by 1967, there were loads of different people making compact cassettes. And in fact, there are a load of dates that I've got here. We'll just go through these quickly, because I'm sure you've got places to be. But stereo was introduced by Philips in 66. Dolby B came to the cassette in 68, as did Chrome tape as well, and the first hi-fi deck really was kind of 1970-71 with the Advent 201. So again, really not a Philips product, it was Advent who really brought out the first deck that played cassettes that people would really consider as a proper hi-fi component. And then the next big event was courtesy of Sony, which, I mean, if Sony weren't on board, this wouldn't have happened. But of course that is the Walkman, 1979. I mean, everyone says 1979, really. Japan, 1979, perhaps US 1980, but, you know, it's expensive, so it's kind of the next few years. But still, cassette sales tripled over the next 4 years. Well, this is a product that had been on the market since 1964-ish. And yet in 1979, 80, 81, 82, cassette sales tripled. Well, that's really down to this fella. And of course, as far as if we go into stats here, the revenue hit the peak for cassettes in the late 1980s, and it was the best-selling format, best-selling pre-recorded music format from 84 to 92. So that's the best part of a decade. CDs, the first time that they sold more than cassettes in the US was 1992. So cassettes had a pretty good run at it as the #1 format. And I've just got one final thought about the compact cassette, something I'd like to mention because it often gets overlooked, and it's to do with its impact on a particular area of popular culture. And it's not to do with music, it's to do with computers and computer games and programming and the early 1980s. In the UK, if you had a Sinclair Spectrum, a Commodore 64, an Amstrad CPC 464, a Dragon 32, an Oricat MOS, this list could go on, but your primary source of loading games and saving programs was to the compact cassette. And a lot of those kids then went on to create some big programming houses that then went on to shape the games that we play on far more sophisticated devices. So as you can see from all the stuff behind me here, the story of the compact cassette is a little bit more complicated than perhaps one line in an obituary that states that Lou Ottens was the inventor of the compact cassette, taking nothing away from him at all. He was the guy, he was the catalyst, he was the chap who went into Philips one day and suggested they work on this idea, and that is ultimately what created the compact cassette. But there was a lot of pre-existing cassette or cartridge-based formats that were assimilated into the design of the cassette, and then following the launch of the cassette there were other formats fell by the wayside, and there was a lot of events that were the reasons behind the cassette being the success where the other formats weren't. And that's really the story of the cassette. So hopefully I've done it a little bit more justice, put a bit of meat on the bones for you there. But that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.
Well, that was Mr. Techmoan giving his account on the history of the compact cassette in memory of Lou Ottens and his team. Mr. Ottens passed away last week at the age of 94. So, what a interesting history. I was not aware of all of those argy-bargy and the non-exclusivity contract and the battle between Grundig and Sony. It's all very interesting. I'll just mention that I've moved down the band a little bit for the input, so we're now on 145.040. Hello there, yes.
Yes, vk3sl, vk3op.
Yes, can hear you loud and clear. Let's hope that we've not interfered with anybody. I hate the thought of treading on other people's shoes.
I think, as it turns out, I think that's a net frequency, and people were just popping up. But
Sure, and they're probably wondering what the hell was going on. Well, we know now. So let's hope that this is a stable place to be for the time being. And how about that for a potted history of the compact cassette?
Yeah, it's good. Reminded me very much of, in some aspects, of the Sony's battle with Beta and VHS.
Yes.
Because Sony actually invented VHS, but
right.
sold the patenting rights off to JVC.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And because they felt that VHS couldn't be developed well enough.
Right.
And so their idea was, okay, we'll just recoup some money from it and we'll keep going with Beta.
Yeah.
And JVC saw the benefit of this and just basically rushed to get it out to market, and that's how they won the game. So they used Sony's own invention against them and beat them to market, and so Sony were left holding Beta, which they stuck with for a long time. They eventually produced VHS machines, but it took them many, many years to kind of...
To acquiesce.
Yeah.
They were usurped. That's an incredible story. The Beta sort of size and aspects of the format remained constant in the broadcast industry, though, didn't they?
They did, and that was, I guess, the benefit for Sony, is that they developed... The transport was much more suitable for pro work. The C-wrap and the way that VHS worked had its issues.
Sure.
Whereas Beta, they developed it into the pro format, so it was running at, I think it was 6 times speed for at the professional format, and it stayed right through to the end of. And look, there are still machines in use today in Betacam digital format. Yeah. And if you buy one of the very top-end machines, Betacam digital machine, it's capable of replaying every format back to the original.
Really? So it's backwards compatible by default.
And that was a deliberate design thing that Sony stuck with for the purposes of... they realised that if someone committed to their system, particularly, say, a news-gathering organisation, they wanted them to be able to use all of their old archival stuff. And so they figured, okay, if we keep a system that's compatible, they can still pull their old tapes out, put them in a machine, and dub them to the new format, or just, use them as required. Sure. And that stood them in good stead. That format lasted a long time and was, it was very, very good. Yeah,
very astute. It's clever marketing to take that initiative, see it longitudinally.
Yeah.
But, I'm aware. I remember when I did my little few weeks at Rip and Lee about 20 years ago, they were in the process of dubbing their analog collection through to digital, and they
was.
had the 2 beta formats there in close.
That
Yeah.
would have probably been John, I guess, the guy that was doing that.
Yeah, I think so.
JV.
Yeah, they're probably people you knew. I met quite a few people there.
Yeah, he was an old staff tape operator when I started as a trainee and had left, but he was pulled back in, and he just essentially freelanced. He was there for a few years doing that because they initially started doing it with the 2-inch format.
Yes.
And then once they'd got through everything, then they went to the 1-inch format. Then I think they started working their way through beta. So
wow.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff to dub.
Yeah. Was there much loss intergenerationally between the 2-inch to the analog Betamax?
2-inch is very high reso, but if you dubbed, obviously, in an analog domain, you're always going to suffer some generational loss.
Yes.
It was only once you went to...
Sorry, it's a noisy fader here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Once you got to, say, Betacam digital, then, of course, you could do digital dubs and negate that. But anything analog to analog involved a little bit of loss. But if it was treated with care, it's the old story of any type of recording process. If you do your lineups correctly, and because a lot of the trick in particularly taking information from 2-inch was setting up the 2-inch machine properly for replay. Because the head drum had 4 heads, and each head, as it rotated, only scanned and placed 16 lines on the tape.
Oh, I see.
And so if you didn't get the equalisation right between the heads and then levels, you'd see banding on the replay.
Right.
And so that was the setup. It was quite a process. And I learnt that. I mean, if I thought about it, I could probably still go and do one. But
wow, goodness me.
Every time you laid up a tape, you literally had to do a line-up.
So for every single tape?
Yeah, because it was about matching the machine to the recording.
Right.
So and of course, if it was recording on a different machine.
Yes.
So you do an initial setup to set the machine up for record and replay, and then you'd put on the test. Every tape had a set of test signals at the head of it recorded onto it by the record machine. It was always the standard was 1 minute or 2 minutes worth of bars and tone. Yeah. And then you would go through and just use that to do a final EQ and just make sure that it looked clean and tidy, and away you went.
Wow. I imagine those machines would have been fairly old by the time they were doing that last generation of dubbing.
Yeah, they were. Unfortunately, I think they kept, in terms of the 2-inch, I think they kept an old, they had an AVC, or AVR1. Now, so the AVR2s were a flat sort of tabletop type machine, probably the size of an old large like industrial washing machine. Yeah. With a monitor bridge above them. But the one was an angled console that the tapes sit on, and it had a far superior time-based corrector in it, and had a vacuum column.
Oh, wow.
A la another machine that we had in there, we had a pair of, they were called ACR 25s, which were 2-inch tape, but in little cassettes and cartridges. Okay. And that ran, I think it might have been 6 minutes maximum. Yeah. And it had a huge carousel in the middle of the machine and 2 transports. And the carousel took 24 of these cartridges. Right. And so the idea, commercial networks would use them for ad replay sequences. So with the 2 transports, it could load a cassette and have it out playing in 2 seconds.
Okay, I think there's one of these machines in one of Dave's videos.
There may be. They're incredibly noisy, quite big. The carousel weighed, half a ton or something. Right. And they required a fairly significant compressed airflow for all the bearings and the stuff, and they were incredibly noisy environment to work around. But at Auntie, they were used to actually put the news to air. Okay. Because each news story would end up on its own cassette and numbered in the carousel. So, you could write, we're playing item 3, which is blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And you could even load up a sequence and these things. And it was amazing to watch because the cassette was basically, the carousel would rotate. The cassette was sucked out of the carousel by the vacuum mechanism. Gosh. And then an application of that vacuum mechanism actually drew the tape out of the cassette and up this vacuum column, and that essentially replaced the capstans and the tension. So what happens when you press play?
Would be in better condition as a result.
And also it got rid of. It made them very quick to start. So I think you had full sound and vision lock up in 300 milliseconds.
Oh my goodness!
So they would. when you hit play, you would actually see the tape length in that vacuum column reduce dramatically
Yeah.
as it, that was the
In an
take up.
instant.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then it slowly drew more out as the thing was playing and kept the constant tension on it.
Wow.
It was an incredible symphony of electromechanical, mechanical, and vacuum. But when they went wrong, they went horribly wrong.
I can only imagine, and I can only imagine that it would have been a very complex thing to resolve if you had a major systems failure.
There was one of the things you used to dread, because there was a period of time I was actually vision switching the news.
Mm-hmm.
And the words you used to really dread hearing over the talkback was the ACR's gone into test mode. Because that meant that you were going to a backup 2-inch reel, A-B sort of thing for the rest of the bulletin, and queuing became very tight. And
it would have been very
Yep.
very labour intensive and sweating. Everyone would have been sweating and working. Oh golly, how about that? I can only imagine the sort of the fervour in trying to sort of maintain the pace, the editorial pace in that industry, and that's really interesting. Oh look, you'll have to do a YouTube video and describe all of this.
Yeah,
Dave
I've probably
could do a
got
cameo.
some photographs, but I'm still in contact. Like I know some of the operators that used to drive them. Who really knew them inside out.
I noticed that WATV have put up a lot of archival stuff. They must have a really strong community of ex-employees who have...
they probably do, yeah.
Yeah,
and there's a guy here in Melbourne that runs a little museum as well. He's got, guys have donated bits of gear. In fact, I've got a bit of gear I should donate to him. I've got a D2 machine, which is
I'd love to see it in action.
Analog output,
Yeah.
but digital internal recording process, still tape. And that format was pushed further on. They used Ampex basically made a version of the ACR 25 called the 225, which used this D2 format. Mm-hmm. But instead of being a big carousel now, it was a cabinet which held perhaps 100 of these smaller cassettes now in this digital format, and it had a little, almost like an industrial robot on an XY axis that basically would travel and select the cassette out of its bin and bring it down to the transport and put it in.
How about that?
And it's interesting that was developed by Ampex primarily as a data backup for computing, and then they saw the way to basically potentially use it for TV purposes, and so that was the spin-off where they were able to then sell the technology and make more money out of it.
Yes, indeed. How about that? It's amazing to sort of see these things in their sort of evolutionary phases, how one particular function influenced another. And look, that's
like the compact cassette, going on to become a computer storage mechanism for loading operating systems and programs on all of those early platforms.
I remember that very well. My friends and I sit there waiting for the cassettes to load up.
The old Micro B or the Oric Atmos or whatever it was, or the Tandy Coco.
Yes, the Tandy and the Dick Smith, whatever it was. I can't remember. I was always on the side watching and being amazed. But every home system had its cassette player on the side to load things up. Look, it's fascinating. But of course, now there's a resurgence in cassettes, and everyone's it's become sort of a retro technology of interest.
I've still got a couple of cassette decks here.
Good.
I've got some cassettes somewhere, I think. Maybe. I've got a couple of decks that I think are still functional. So.
Oh, excellent. I've got a couple of classic decks I'd like to get some new belts for. One's an A400, a TAC, with the classic VU meters on the front. And another one's a Harman Kardon from the 70s.
HK. My AV amp downstairs for is a big HK.
Okay, very good. Yeah, no, those early decks were just works of art, and they had the proverbial clunk. I like that pre-solenoid when you really feel the visceral side of clicking things into
I think the one
action.
that everyone aspired to, wasn't it? The Nakamichi Dragon was supposedly one of the best.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, another one I've always used to salivate over were these Super Scopes. They had a range.
They used to use those in radio at Auntie for news guys used to take those out to record radio news stuff on.
Did they
It
really?
was one of the formats that they used for a long time because it was a single portable, quite good quality, very easy to drive. Like a journalist could take it out and record reasonable product, and with a good external mic, you could get some good results on those. And,
I think they're very good.
And certainly a lot easier than a Nagra.
Yeah, that's right. I always wanted a Nagra too, but one did turn up and I got it. So I have got a Nagra here, a Nagra 3.
Oh, very good.
And it's very nice to use. I sometimes walk around with it with a mic and just pretend I'm doing stuff when I'm feeling particularly
they're amazingly
crazy.
well-built machines. They really are.
They're just works of art.
One of our sound recorders, there's a story goes that years ago they were recording something down at Phillip Island, and the neck strap around his neck broke or whatever, and the thing fell into the salt water in the drink.
Oh, really?
And of course they're all mortified.
Yes.
And he was quick thinking. He got a tub of a plastic tub, put fresh water in it, pull the battery and tape and everything, and just put the Nagra in the water.
Yep.
And they then just to keep the oxygen off it.
Yes.
Transported it back to maintenance at Rippers, and
basically
the guys pulled it out, pulled the entire thing down, cleaned it, re-lubricated, reassembled it, tested it, worked to factory spec. It was just, phenomenal.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love stories like that. Yeah, they the Stellavoxes and the Nagras are just the most beautiful machines. I'm looking at my Nagra now as I speak.
Very good.
With a modular meter.
To go out and record some field stuff so you can utilise it.
Yeah. I used to take it to art galleries with my daughter. We used to, Beatrice and I used to go and see art exhibitions, and I used to love getting the kids to talk about art. I'd just get them to make up stories. And I'd say, tell me a story about this picture. And for a long time, I did it with binaural mics and sort of really in-ear mics and stuff like that. And I thought, I'm going to start taking the Nagra.
Oh, wow.
And so I did that for quite a while.
Great.
And it was really good. And the kids didn't know any difference. But I just made me feel like I was doing something a bit retro and interesting. And so I've got all these 5-inch reels of family stuff, but the quality is amazing. Even in this old machine, it's just...
Oh, they are. They are superb. And, when I first started there and shooting, still drama was being shot on film, 16 or Super 16.
Yeah.
All the audio was recorded on Nagra.
Wow.
It was all. That's why all the slating was important for synchronisation points.
Yeah, for sure.
But it was all...
I'd love to see that done. I'd love to see the sync arrangement in being sort of completed in the field with the TV crew.
Well, literally, it was, the first thing to roll up was tape, so they'd turn over, and it would be the audio recorder that would start, because it took a little bit longer to come up to speed because the film was very quick.
Yes.
And then basically the camera operator, the field recordings, the audio guy would call out speed, showing that they were at speed and lock. Yeah. And because they had sync lock modules for shooting with film. Okay. So that the Nagra would run, to a higher spec of speed lock.
Yep.
And once they called out speed, the camera operator would have framed up the slate and would say mark it, and the clapper loader would call, the take number, blah blah blah, hit, make sure the clap was clear and visible. Yeah. And and there was an art to that, not doing it too hard, so the thing bounced or whatever, because the point of the jaw was closing and the sound was the important bit.
Yes, of course,
and
that's true.
The camera operator would reframe, and the moment they had their starting frame, they'd call out frame, and then away they'd go.
Fair enough.
And that's, or if they couldn't slate at the head, then what you would do is bring the slate in upside down. Yep. And do a closing clap and call tail slate. Oh. So they would use the back end of the take as the sync point rather than the front. Because for some setups the framing reframe was too difficult, so then they just do a tail slate.
Fair enough.
And then that was just set up, typically in the old suites, where the sound would be transferred into a 16mm sprocketed sound for cutting purposes. Yep. And so on the old Steenbecks, you have the film in, you literally, rack the frames until you got the jaw closing frame, and then you just run the sound up and down till you got the little, the pulse, you'd hear it, and then you just, with Chinograph, you used to mark the audio. Yeah. Literally to mark the sync points, and then away you went. And away you started your cut.
How about that? That is amazing. What a commentary. Fabulous, Frank. And I imagine you wouldn't want any shutter at all if you had any sort of...
again, film cameras, shutter...
I mean on the clapperboard.
Oh, yeah, no, it was...
you had to be a mechanic. You had to be certain.
It was just the way... It was an art. I had to do it as a trainee when I started. Clapper loading was... that role on the shoot is basically you're like second to the camera assistant.
Sure.
So your role was to load the magazines for film.
Yep.
So I got pretty proficient at loading 16mm film in a black bag while we were driving between locations. So it was totally by feel in your lap.
Wow. Was that something, was it intuitive?
It became, you just practiced it with an old piece of film and mags in light until you understood the path and the mechanism, what you had to do, and then you started doing it, maybe with your eyes closed and double checking, and then you do it inside the bag until you got to the point where you could just do it blindfolded and, whilst telling jokes. And
sure.
And so that was the role. So you were clapper loader. So you used to load and have to do all the claps. And part of that was also then entailing keeping accurate negative sheets. So processing sheets. So every take you'd have to, the T-stop, exposure, what blah, 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 details. So for the lab, for notes and reference, so that if the rushers came back and there was an issue, they'd have a traceability or an accountability of, okay, what happened and why.
Yeah, sure, yeah. But I imagine the order would have been absolutely... It would have been etched in...
absolutely. It was a real discipline,
totally.
like anything. And so, I mean, as clapper loader, they're probably one of the hardest working members of the crew because they're in before everybody else to make sure all of the stock's out of the fridge and in the vehicle and the correct, like you've spoken to the director of photography the night before saying, right, what are we going to start shooting with? What do you want loaded for the next day? And you would load all that up in the morning. You'd get all the batteries off charge and you'd literally make sure that the camera, truck, vehicle, whatever it was absolutely ready to turn up on location and shoot. And then at the end of the day, you had to then lay out everything you needed for the next day, put all the batteries on charge, final cleaning, and then your job also was on the way home was to actually drop the neg off at the lab to get processed with the sheets.
Okay. My goodness.
So incredibly long days.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Was there much sort of maintenance on the machines? Did you have to lube them or clean them, or was
the cameras were pretty good.
much shedding or anything like that?
The primary camera that we were using for shooting drama was an Ariflex SR, SR3s. A bulletproof camera. They've still got some in there, and I was kind of hoping to get one before I left because it's kind of what I learnt on. But probably up until the advent of real, digital stuff becoming viable, that was probably the camera that most of the natural history documentaries you would have seen, particularly all of the stuff, up until, I don't know, at least the year 2000 kind of thing. Okay. Perhaps a bit beyond.
Sure.
And historically were shot on. They would work.
It was the industry standard.
Yeah, they just were super reliable. German company, Arri, made, all sorts of formats, 35mm and all sorts of stuff. And now entered the digital sphere with a camera called the Alexa, which is incredibly reliable and highly regarded.
Sure.
So they would go for regular maintenance schedules, but the raw camera themselves was so reliable that on the day-to-day on the job, rarely did you have to do anything. The biggest thing would be occasionally if you got some issues with the gate, that you start to get a little bit of scratching, of the film. And
so how would that be? Would that come back in the negative? Well, obviously when they process the film, that would be obvious, and then you'd have to deal with it.
No, even
retrospect.
before so, you didn't even rely. What you would do is at the end of every take. Once you had a director say, okay, cut, bought, check the gate, you may have heard that term used.
Yes.
Check the gate literally means the camera assistant, the camera operator would then just roll a tiny little bit more film on to make sure that the last bits of the take are well and truly in the mag. And then the camera assistant would actually lift the mag off the camera and with a torch have a look at the film and
see the
shine
quality
to see if there's
of the
any
emulsion.
scratching on it. No signs of scratching.
Right.
Check the sprocket hole for no signs of damage.
Yes.
And also look into the gate at the back of the camera and make sure that there are no little hairs of film or anything that has been stripped off.
Yeah.
And if that's all clean and clear, then the assistant would call gates clear.
Okay.
And then that would be the go take and the one that was sent off for processing, and then you'd move on to the next setup.
Sure. No, intriguing. And what sort of did you always use the same film stock? Was it
predominantly? It depended on the DOP. So Kodak Eastman was probably the preeminent stock, but Fuji would get used as well. Within that, you would then, the choices would be made about, so it would depend on what the shoot was. So if you were shooting outside, then they would be picking a daylight balance stock, unless you also had to mix in with a lot of night studio stuff. Then they might go to using a tungsten-based stock and use a Raton 85 correction filter on the front to correct the colour temperature down to the tungsten temperature, so that you're always using the same stock.
Yes, okay.
And then within that choice, the DOP would then look at what we were doing. So, okay, if you're shooting outdoors, daytime, bright days, then you'd run a fairly low kind of sensitivity to keep the noise down. You know, it might have been 100 ASA, ISO, or 64 or something, or 50.
Sure.
And if you're shooting night, they'd probably go to a 320, 400. And so there's, and there were little, so we would stock for a given shoot. They would buy in, enough stock of each, and then on a daily basis, that was the clapper loader's discussion with the DOP of an evening. He would have already looked at his next day's schedule and gone, okay, I need you to load 4 mags of 6240, and they're all just different stocks that refer to the temperature, the speed, and so that's what you do. You literally go, and those mags were 400 feet each, which was 10 minutes. 16 mil.
So if they were wanting to use different stock for different conditions in close relief, if you're doing a on-field work and you had to suddenly go underground or low light situation and you wanted to change, would they use a different camera in that instance, or they just?
Or they might just change the mag on that camera.
Right.
And you'd also have the coverage that within, your crew vehicle, you had a fridge in there for storing stock on the go, and you would always have some of the higher speed stuff or variations to cover the unforeseen scenario. So you would carry a little bit of extra, but certainly the amount of planning required when today you turn up with a digital camera that records onto a card type non-volatile RAM media, and literally in the menu you go, right, colour, temperature, speed, and the modern sensors are so fast. I mean, I've shot stuff at 3200 ASA, and that you look at it and you sort of think, where's the noise? There kind of isn't any.
Extraordinary. It's another world, really. But it's completely fascinating to hear about your formative experience. And so they're using these technologies up until the early 2000s. Is that when digital formats came in?
Some shoots probably even a bit longer. But then we started to then shoot drama, started to get shot on Betacam on particularly SX, which was the full SP, the full bandwidth analog variant towards the later years of that, and then once digital came out, then a lot more was, and then really on Betacam digital. So TV type drama. I mean, anything motion picture was still shot film, 35mm anamorphic through to much later than that. It's probably now only really been, I guess, the last decade to 15 years that digital film production has taken off, with cameras like the Red and the Alexa and Panavision even have their own version of a digital camera. So you can shoot natively on super 35mm sensors. And they're now very good. Certainly the speed and the density of information is equal to and can even surpass film now. The only thing that they can't surpass film with yet in the digital domain is dynamic range. Film's still got a superior latitude.
Interesting.
But it won't be long.
How about that? Do you remember the last time you used film? Is it sort of etched in your mind?
I'm trying to think now.
Was there a particular event and you thought, this is it?
The
end of a 100-year tradition.
A fair while ago for me, because I was operating in there as a trainee. So I moved out into the electronic studio production, outside broadcast and stuff. The last, I think, film shoot that I worked on was probably a thing called Poker Face, which starred Bruno Lawrence while he was still around, which would have been late 80s.
Sure.
And they used it beyond that. As an example, I know, for instance, 16mm was still Sea Change was shot on 16mm.
Oh, was it really? How about that?
The camera operators are a good friend of mine. Wow. And I used to poke my head in there because the director of photography was Siggy's brother-in-law, so he had a vested interest in making sure she looked good.
Fantastic, I love it. Oh, industry stories. That is just brilliant, Frank. You've really, you've just really told a wonderful story there. I want to pick up on this. There's so many tangents. It's really interesting just to hear the the stuff on the ground, the interfacing, the decisions, the planning, the whole.
And that's, we've always remarked that you look back at that old school, and major shoots are still the same, the way they're planned.
Yeah.
But even today, things have become more reactive because of the mobile phone.
Yeah.
But prior to that era, everything had to be so well planned, because quite often you're going out to locations where you just didn't have communications to the outside world easily.
Sure.
And so, of course, the units had to be self-contained. They had to have everything with them they needed. Everything from, so you imagine, be it the audio guys, their selection of microphones to use, tape stock for them, etc., batteries, all of that, the film, camera end of it. But even thinking about, the support trucks with the set dressing pieces and costumes and all of the stuff that was required. All of these departments had to be kind of in sync and needed to be really have everything they required for the day's shoot, and to allow for a little bit of contingency.
Yeah, I was
without
say,
the ability to go, we've forgotten this, or this is broken, and just call base, and can you, on a mobile, can you send another one out?
That's right. And we just take so much for granted now. It's amazing. But and look, another topic I'd just love to hear more about is the editing and how that's changed over the generations, because the whole business of continuity is probably a different universe now.
Well, it's interesting. Continuity in terms of on set is still done the same way in many respects.
Right.
Probably what's changed is you still have a person on set called the DA, the director's assistant, or continuity assistant.
Yep.
And they are literally a person that sits there and watches each take. They're highly trained, and they they take notes on everything about, even when an actor, for instance, on a particular line, if there's a scene where they're sitting around, let's say dinner table, having dinner, she'll even make notes, or he will make notes of on what line actor A picked up the wine glass to have a sip and put it down, and all of those little things, and the level of the glasses, and the historical thing was at the start and end of takes too, they would take Polaroids. Polaroids were used massively.
How about
I think the TV film industry was probably responsible for keeping Polaroid afloat for decades.
That? I would never have guessed, but it makes complete sense, because you get instantaneous.
So it develops, so they've got a record for subsequent takes, and they would get put in a folder with all of the notes of that particular scene. Wardrobe would use Polaroids for looking at the continuity of how an actor was dressed for a particular scene. And then those folders were kept on file until they were totally done with the editing process.
Yeah, sure.
And then followed through then that, those notes would go into the edit suite, particularly the continuity stuff about particular takes, as in, what an actor did, motion, whatever, so that the editors had access to that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And and then of course it's gone from the Steenbeck type platter editing platform, where they were literally cutting the film and the audio to make a take, hence the term cutting, because it was physically
it was a physical operation, of course.
And even like doing a crossfade on the sprocket stuff, like the simple thing of, you do a diagonal cut. So you had one piece as it, the track width decreased to nothing as the other one came up, so you could do a very simple crossfade. Or hard cuts, however they did it. And
but just the way the cutting room floor and all of the artifacts and just being able to maintain a system,
As a trainee, I worked in with the film editors, Dave Luthers, who's an old British guy, a great film editor, very old school. And I did a little bit of a stint in there while he was editing the first series of Nature of Australia.
Oh, okay.
Shot on 16, and so the way that edit suite was full of racks of film hanging up, little bits of offcuts and takes, and keeping track of this stuff.
But they must have had systems. They must have. You have to have a really. Logic would have to have been very well determined.
Whereas now it's all dumped into a system, and it's all done off hard drives and non-linear editing. The principles of it are the same. And it's funny how some of the guys who are still in the industry who learned to edit on a Steenbeck are still and have moved through the system and are still in there and editing on non-linear are still some of the most highly regarded editors because of their understanding of the process.
Sure, and the history, or the way that the concepts have evolved, and expectations are sort of in line with that too. I suppose as viewers, people expect a certain pace or a rhythm with editing, but I have to say that the number of edits, the pace is just so fast in modern films.
Oh, that's a stylistic thing. very
Yeah,
much so. You
yeah.
know, you can almost pick a film
Mm.
by its era now. That's why I
Yeah.
still love, an absolute favourite of mine is 2001.
Yeah,
And I love science fiction.
yeah,
And it's such a different paced film.
yeah,
You know,
sure.
it allows things to settle,
Yeah,
gives you time,
yeah.
but it works.
Yes, of course it does. Look, I think it's if people grow up with the modern system. I mean, for me, I'm you know that I just love silent films and those really early motion pictures. There's just so much space. You know, they can have a profile on someone's face for a minute or two.
Yeah, and another thing that if you look at a lot of the older films too, a lot of them were shot proscenium arch.
Mm.
So that literally kind of like a wide shot or a medium wide shot, and they
Yeah.
just let the action happen
Yeah,
within the frame.
like a stage.
Yeah,
Mm.
and they let the actors sell it.
Mm.
And the performances, you know, it was
Yeah.
like, you know, actors knew for specific things. It was like the old story, you know, you got to hit the back of the room.
Mm.
They knew how to project a performance in the same way, and that's where you had that very vaudevillian, almost campy,
Yes,
over the
That's
top.
right. There's a
But
sort
that
of pantomime
but that
dimension
was
to
a
it.
style because of that having to, you know,
Yeah.
exaggerate the
Yeah.
effect.
Yeah, but I find a lot of modern editing, and this is just my prejudice, I just find I get really jittery because it's just too fast for me to process.
Yeah, I
and-
think, and it depends too, like, you know, the edit suite gives you the power to also do that to a viewer, to
Yeah.
unnerve them.
Yes, that's right.
Depending on
So
how
it's,
you
it's a
edit.
part of their emotional
And
control.
even the combination of that with framing, like depending on what a director's there to achieve or a producer.
Yeah.
There are certain things you can do that can
Mm.
place an audience at ease,
Yeah,
or you can
yes.
make them incredibly uncomfortable.
That's right. Yes, you can.
And the subtleties and the psychology of that are now
Yeah.
well understood and
Yeah.
utilised.
Yes, it's fascinating. We, as a family, we sat down and watched the first Star Wars, a couple of the first, and the Return of the Jedi
Yes.
about a month ago, and it's just a different universe, isn't it?
Well, it is, you know, and even the pace of that's a little different, isn't it? And,
Yeah,
and really, when you analyse what Star Wars is, I mean, I love it. So
Yeah.
I remember I was 13 when I went and saw that in the
Sure.
cinemas in town, and
Yeah.
walked out and just was so amazed. I walked straight back to the end of the long line and lined up to go and buy a ticket to see the next session again.
Fantastic. Yeah.
But it's a swashbuckler.
Yeah.
You know, it was just a more
Yeah,
modern
it
take
is.
on like an old Errol Flynn movie.
It
or
is.
you know,
It
it's
is.
very
In
much
every
what
sense,
it
it is. Absolutely.
It's all space opera, as they
Yes,
called.
that's
And
it.
yeah,
Yes.
it is interesting to see the evolution of those films as well, because within a franchise.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're aware of now, but there's even there's an offshoot series that is being produced by, because now Disney, or as they're known, the Mouse House,
Yeah.
own all of that,
Yes.
and they've produced an offshoot thing called The Mandalorian,
Okay.
which is a serialised. But
Yeah.
and I'm really enjoying it because
Yeah. Good.
they're half-hour episodes.
Yes.
And they're all little self-contained stories.
So
and there is an overarching arc that kind of joins the narrative together, but you can just watch one on its own.
Yeah.
And the pace is kind of, I like it because it's not, whilst it's still, modern editing, but I think they've backed away from that style just a touch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it really, really works well.
That's great.
Some great
look up
storytelling in there.
The
Mandalorian, yeah.
Mandalorian. I'll mention it to Henry. He'll know it for sure.
Yeah, it's really well worth a watch. It's very well done, and it's very accessible. And
That's good.
It's great.
I've watched the last couple of Star Wars movies when they first came out in the last couple of years with the kids in the cinema. And, it's incredibly intense and just an amazing experience. But I also felt like it sort of really unnerved me. But, it's only because I'm used to certain, styles and ambience.
Yeah, and I think probably too, I guess, in a music and audio sense, the soundtracks on some of these modern movies now, that they're pushing levels to the limits.
And pushing compression to levels.
If you go and see, for instance, those movies at like the IMAX, which is a fantastic experience.
Yeah.
But I still think that they run the audio system in there a little too high.
Yeah.
It's really right on the limit of comfort at times. It's pushed very hard.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a fatigue aspect to that. I acknowledge that.
But what's interesting about those last few Star Wars films is that I very much enjoyed them. I mean, they have their flaws, but I guess too, you think about what they were trying to do is that they're trying to tie up the whole Skywalker legacy in that aspect of the storyline, and so there are all these constraints they had to work within because this is what's happened, and so they have to tie it off, and that limits what they can do.
Yeah, this is such a point of discussion in my family. Yes, exactly. There's a lot of intense discussions on exactly this point. So yeah, I completely understand. Yeah. Okay, you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyhow, yeah, all good. Well, thank you, Frank. I'm going to have to go. I'd like to talk all evening, but I'm going to have to go and put something on the stove and look like I'm a part of it.
Likewise here, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you. And,
thank you.
Yeah.
It's great. It's been wonderful to hear your industry tales, and you've just explained so much, and you've captured my imagination, and now I'm all sort of wondering about the next episode, so save them up. This is just tremendous. And I was going to ask you how your Hagstrom's going. Or he hasn't arrived yet, has he?
No, he hasn't arrived yet.
You put the order in for that?
Yeah, that's done. I'm waiting on the freight quote for that aspect of it.
Sure. I did have a look at it, and I looked up. There's been a book written about them, apparently.
Okay. I didn't realise that.
Yeah, I was looking up their website and just reading about the guitars, but that's most excellent indeed. You've done well.
No, they're an interesting beast. So,
yeah, brilliant.
And, so add to the collection.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
So I also fan of them, and also of Mayton, the local crowd.
Yep.
I have one of theirs and another on the way, so.
Oh, well, that's good.
They, and it's great because it's locally made instruments and local timbers, and
yes,
and it's, you can go and visit the factory. It's fabulous.
That's great. It's always good being able to see them made. I've sat in Lou the Area's workshops a lot in my life, and it's just fascinating to watch.
Well, I'm considering doing a course. There are a few people in town that run a Lucy's course for guitar making.
Oh, wonderful!
And so you pay a fee, which is pretty much the same as buying a top-end guitar. So it's not unreasonable. And for that you get, their help and access to all of their tools and workshops.
Oh, look, it's
and
worth
the
it.
Timbers and all of the other bits.
A fantastic thing to do. I reckon it'd be really great.
Yeah, and so you go and you decide, okay, what do I want to make? Do I want to make an acoustic or an electric or whatever the style is? And then they'll talk you through various aspects and sort of, just drill down into what it is you want to achieve.
Yeah.
And once you've decided upon all that, then, you get the timbers and they show you the whole process of, shaping and so I'm really considering that something I'd
good
like
for
to
you.
do.
I wish you well with that. I hope it works out for you, because that would be a really exciting thing to do.
I think it'd be fabulous to be able to play an instrument that you've made yourself.
Oh, totally. And it would feed back into the whole thing. You'd learn more about yourself, about your playing, it would be a multi-dimensional experience. It'd be great.
So
good stuff.
Excellent.
Something
we're looking at. All right.
Brilliant.
Well,
okay, mate. All the best. Thank you for that. It's been a great chat.
vk3sl.
Yes, thank you, Frank. This is vk3sl. We're testing here, of course, and we'll wind up, I think, fairly soon, because there are other things happening here. But I was just having a look, and I found some Boozy and Hawkes vinyl from the. Let me get my spectacles. It's from the Donovan Joyce radio production collection. I don't know how they ended up here, and I didn't even know I had them, but there's a dozen or so. So I think we'll just sample some. This one is Jay Wilbur and his string ensemble. Now, Jay Wilbur, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1930s, early 30s, had the, Jay Wilbur and his Midnight Follies. It was sort of a dance band in Britain, but evidently in later times he worked for Boozy and Hawkes. So this one's entitled Fiddle Dance. So I think it's worth a sample. So we'll just frisbee it onto the turntable and into the groove. Let's have a listen. Wilbur and the orchestra, recorded for Boozy and Hawkes, probably early 1950s, I think. We'll just get it off the table and hold it up to the mic. Any other information? Just says Jay Wilbur and his string ensemble. The other side, that was Fiddle Dance. Other side is Folk Tune. So presumably these discs were for a bit of atmosphere in radio plays, the proverbial chapel ambience, in this case Boozy and Hawkes ambience. Let's have a listen to Folk Tune from the same band. vk3sl testing. of a swinger there. Not quite in centre, but very charming. And it was a work called Folk Tune. I wonder who the composer is. I'll just bring it over and have a look. Boozy and Hawkes, Fletcher, whoever Fletcher was. It's very English. And it was Jay Wilbur and his string ensemble. I've got another one here. I quite enjoy these light music selections. This one's shellac, actually. I can't bend this one. And it's the music of John Ansell, renowned British composer, particularly of light music. And it's the New Concert Orchestra and a work called A Street in Algiers. Well, let's have a listen to this. I'm vk3sl testing. Music of John Ansell, and A Street in Algiers is the name of the record. It's from the Boozy and Hawkes selection and the Donovan Joyce archive, apparently. There's a few of them here. Quite enjoy programmatic music, and I think we'll wind up with something that's sort of vaguely programmatic. And he was doing the proverbial family taxi today, including Mr. H, who's now playing the horn at uni. And he says all the horn players just have a real thing about Richard Strauss's Alpine Symphony. Now, it's a work I remember studying a long time ago and being just completely blown out of the water by this work. It's epic in every sense of the word. He had a 120-piece orchestra, 8 horns, and this is Richard Strauss's real sort of, his way of addressing an interest in nature. And he was a mountain climber, would you believe? And this Alpine Symphony just draws on his inspiration from the high Alps in Europe. And as I said, written in 1915, it's fairly sort of mid-period Richard Strauss. And the work has just got to be heard to be believed in its entirety. It's just full of colour and texture and in wonderful sort of climactic moments, and just the most superb writing for brass and heavy, heavy chromaticism. But just never has there been someone who just could masterfully use orchestral textures, and it's in the romantic tradition. It is something to behold. And I had to almost pull the car over listening to this today. Yeah, mind you, Henry had it playing very loud in the car. But yeah, it's magnificent music. So I think we'll ride out with just the finale, the last bit, and we'll hear a portion of this work, and then we'll revisit it. We'll find some of the highlight points and look at it more closely. I might even get Mr. H to talk about it. He knows much more about it than I do. Thank you for your indulgence, and we look forward to your company maybe next week. I still haven't decided if we're going away next weekend, quite possibly. If so, there may be other missions on this at this time. So we'll wait and see what happens. It's all in the lap of the gods. I don't pre-organise things too much. Cheers for now. This is vk3sl.